Shalom, Israel. It's Kazawan. And the name of this video is The Lunar Sabbath is Wrong. When is the Sabbath day? This is a highly requested topic. I avoided this topic for a very long time for many different reasons. However, everything happens at its appointed time. So here we go. Now, this is going to be a very long video. And because of this particular topic, I'm going to deal with the scriptures like normal, but I'm also going to deal with history and other documentation as well. Now, before I get into it, we have to understand why it's so important to understand when the Sabbath day actually is. This is Exodus 31 and verse 12. It says, "And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying," verse 13, "Speak thou also unto the children of Israel." So the Most High told Moses to speak to the children of Israel. So this applies to every Israelite. It says, saying, "Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep." Watch this. "For it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am Yahweh that does sanctify you." So the Most High says that the Israelites are to keep the Sabbath throughout our generations. So this doesn't apply only to the Old Testament times. This applies to this very day. Verse 14, "Ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Every one that defileth it shall surely be put to death. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people." So again, this is a very serious commandment. Now watch this, verse 15. "6 days may work be done, but in the seventh is the Sabbath of rest, holy to Yahweh. Whosoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death." So here, the Most High gives us the cycle of how a biblical week is counted. 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. That is the cycle that the Most High set up in the very beginning. Any cycle that doesn't follow this cycle is not the cycle that the Most High gave us. The Most High gave us 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. That is what he gave us. Verse 16, "Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations." Watch this. "For a perpetual covenant." Perpetual means everlasting or never ending. So again, the Sabbath day applies to every single Israelite that exists. Verse 17, "It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever." There it is again. The Most High is making this point very clear. Watch this. It says, "For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed." Again, we see the cycle repeated. 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest. Any counting system that is different from this is not what the Most High established. That's very important. This has to be understood because there are many different doctrines about the Sabbath day and when it starts. However, if a Sabbath doctrine doesn't line up with this system, it is automatically wrong. Now, a perfect example of what I'm talking about is the Lunar Sabbath doctrine. The Lunar Sabbath doctrine says that the weekly seventh-day Sabbath changes days every month based on the day that the new moon comes in. In other words, if the new moon comes in on a Wednesday, then the Sabbath for that month is every Wednesday because it's based on the new moon. Now, I'm cool with a lot of brothers that follow the Lunar Sabbath, but biblically, the Lunar Sabbath is wrong. It doesn't work according to the system that the Most High established in the beginning. Let's prove it. This is a lunar Sabbath calendar. Notice that there are no names for the days of the week except for the Sabbath day. That's because the Most High never named any of the days of the week. He only named one day, which was the Sabbath day. Now, notice that the new moon day is separate from all the other days. The reason for this is, according to the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, new moon day is the first day of the month, but it's not counted as the first day of the week because new moon day is its own day. In other words, new moon day is the first day of the month, but the next day after that, which is the second day of the month, that is the first day of the week. So with this system, the Sabbath days will always be on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th of every month. And then there will be 1 or 2 transitional days until the new moon comes in again, which will start a brand new month. And then the whole cycle repeats itself again. So the first is new moon day, and then you have 6 days of work, and then the 8th is the Sabbath, and then you have 6 days of work, and then the 15th is the Sabbath. And that system repeats itself until you get to the last Sabbath on the 29th. And then you get 1 or 2 transitional days before the new moon comes in again. That is how the Lunar Sabbath calendar works. Now, that sounds good, but this system is flawed. Notice that I mentioned transitional days. Now, transitional days are the 1 or 2 days when the moon is black at the end of the month before the new moon comes in again. Here's the first problem of many. According to the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, the transitional days do not count as days. According to that doctrine, those days are just transitional days until the new moon comes in again. So you don't count them as days. They're not actual days, even though they're called transitional days. Even though the sun still rises in the morning and you get up and go about your day, according to the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, those days are not actual days. So basically what that means is you can have 1 or 2 full days that pass by before the new moon comes in again, and that 1 or 2 days is totally ignored as if they never happened, because you can't count them as days. Now, why is that the case in this doctrine? Because if you count that 1 or 2 days as actual days, when the new moon does come in the next day, there will only be 2 days in between 2 Sabbath days, which is impossible according to the Bible. And that's only if you consider new moon day to be a Sabbath day, because some lunar Sabbath keepers don't consider new moon day to be a Sabbath day. So for them, they will have 1, 2, skip new moon day, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days between 2 Sabbaths, which again is impossible according to the Bible. The scriptures say there must be 6 days between every Sabbath. So to avoid this problem, lunar Sabbath keepers say, oh, those 2 days don't count. Those are just transitional days. Those are not real days. Now, anybody should be able to see that that is nonsensical, and it's definitely not biblical. Where are all these extra days at in the Bible? Why don't we see these transitional days mentioned anywhere in the scriptures? The reason is because that is a man-made doctrine. There is absolutely no verse in the Bible that talks about transitional days where the moon is dark and therefore those days are not counted as actual days. That is nowhere in the Bible. That's just an attempt to try to fix one of the many problems with the lunar Sabbath. However, it's a problem that can't be fixed because it happens every month. There's always 1 or 2 extra days at the end of every month before the new moon comes in again. Always. Now, if those days are not real days, what do you do on those days? Do you rest? Do you work? Where are the instructions in the Bible of what to do with these extra days? There are no instructions because this is a man-made doctrine. Now again, according to the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, the weekly Sabbath can only fall on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th day of every month. So if I'm able to show the weekly Sabbath in the Bible even once on a different date, the whole Lunar Sabbath doctrine falls completely apart. So let's do it. This is 1 Samuel chapter 20 and verse 5. It says, "And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field unto the 3rd day at even." So this was the day before the new moon, and at this time King Saul hated David, and David knew it. So he told Jonathan that he was going to hide out in the field until the 3rd day. Let's jump down to verse 18. It says, "Then Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty." Verse 19, "And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly, and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself when the business was in hand, and shalt remain by the stone Ezel." Now, let's jump down to verse 24. It says, "So David hid himself in the field," watch this, "and when the new moon was come, the king sat him down to eat meat," meaning King Saul sat down to eat. So this is new moon day, the 1st day of the month. Verse 25, it says, "And the king sat upon his seat as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty." Verse 26, "Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought, Something hath befallen him. He is not clean, surely he is not clean." Now, watch this. Verse 27, it says, "And it came to pass on the morrow," this is the day after New Moon Day, it says, "which was the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meet, neither yesterday nor today?" So here we see that the day after New Moon Day was the 2nd day of the month, according to the Bible. So that proves that New Moon Day is the 1st day of the month. So, at this point, it's the 2nd day of the month, and David still didn't show up to eat. So Saul gets mad at David and threatens to kill him. Now, let's jump down to verse 34. It says, "So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month. For he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame." Verse 35, "And it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field," watch this, "at the time appointed with David, and a little lad with him." Remember, they had planned to meet on the 3rd day in verse 5. So that's what's happening now. Let's jump down to verse 42. It says, "And Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of Yahweh, saying, Yahweh be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city." So David left. Now let's pick it up at 1 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1. It says, "Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee?" Verse 2, "And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. So David told the priest that Saul sent him to do some business, but actually David was on the run. Now, watch what David says next. Verse 3. Now therefore, what is under thy hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. So David asked the priest for 5 loaves of bread, because he and his men was hungry. He hadn't eaten because he was on the run. Verse 4. And the priest answered David and said, watch this, there is no common bread under my hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. So the priest told David that he didn't have any regular bread. He only had the holy showbread that he just took out of the temple. Only the priest was supposed to eat that bread, but he told David he would give it to him if he was ceremonially clean. Verse 5. And David answered the priest and said unto him, of a truth, women have been kept from us. Watch this. About these 3 days since I came out, meaning since he came out from where he was hiding at. We know he was hiding for 3 days according to chapter 20, verse 19. So this is the 3rd day of the month when he's talking to the priest. Let me read this verse again. It says, and David answered the priest and said unto him, of a truth, women have been kept from us. Here it is. About these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it was sanctified this day in the vessel. Now, watch this. Verse 6, it says, so the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken from before Yahweh to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. So the only bread that the priest had was the old showbread that he had just replaced with the new showbread. David showed up right after the priest had changed the bread, and he gave the old bread to David to eat. Now remember, this was the 3rd day of the month when this happened. Now, what day did the priest have to replace the showbread according to the law? Let's see. This is Leviticus chapter 24 and verse 5. It says, and thou shalt take fine flour and bake 12 cakes thereof. 2/10 deals shall be in 1 cake. So this is the showbread. Verse 6, it says, and thou shalt set them in 2 rows, 6 on a row, upon the pure table before Yahweh. Verse 7, and thou shalt put pure frankincense upon each row. Watch this. That it may be on the bread for a memorial, even an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So here we see how the showbread was prepared and how it was set up. Now, how often did they have to do this? Verse 8, it says, every Sabbath he shall set it in order before Yahweh continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. So we see here that the priest had to replace the old showbread with new showbread every Sabbath day, continually. So the showbread was changed on the Sabbath day. Therefore, we know that David came to the priest on the Sabbath day when he was replacing the showbread. But we also know that it was the 3rd day of the month, not the 8th day. So that proves that the Sabbath does not always fall on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th day of every month. Therefore, the lunar Sabbath doctrine is wrong. David came to the priest on the 3rd day of the month, and we know for a fact that that was the Sabbath day, because Yahushua used this same story to cut the Pharisees about the Sabbath day. Watch. This is Matthew chapter 12 and verse 1. It says, "At that time, Yahushua went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were a-hungered, and began to pluck the ears of the corn and to eat." Verse 2, "But when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day." So the Pharisees told Yahushua that he was breaking the Sabbath day. But watch this. Verse 3, it says, "But he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was a-hungered, and they that were with him?" Verse 4, "How he entered into the house of the Most High, and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them which were with him, but only for the priests." Now, why did Yahushua use this example with the Pharisees? Because David did that on the Sabbath day, just like the disciples were plucking corn on this Sabbath day. Again, it was the weekly Sabbath and the third day of the month when David ate the showbread. It wasn't the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, or the 29th. So that proves that the lunar Sabbath doctrine is wrong. Because if there is any weekly Sabbath in the Bible not on one of those days, then the whole doctrine falls apart. Let's look at another example. This is Numbers chapter 10, verse 11. It says, "And it came to pass on the 20th day of the second month, in the second year, that the cloud was taken up from off the tabernacle of the testimony." Verse 12, "And the children of Israel took their journeys out of the wilderness of Sinai, and the cloud rested in the wilderness of Paran." So we see here that the children of Israel started traveling on the 20th day, and they ended their journey in the wilderness of Paran. Now, let's see how long the journey was. Let's jump down to verse 33. It says, "And they departed from the mount of Yahweh," watch this, 3 days' journey, "and the ark of the covenant of Yahweh went before them in the 3 days' journey to search out a resting place for them." Now we know from verse 11 that they left on the 20th day of the month. And we see here in verse 33 that it was a 3-day journey. In other words, it took them 3 days to get to their destination. So that means that they traveled on the first day, which was the 20th, and the second day, which was the 21st, and they arrived on the third day, which was the 22nd. So they reached their destination on the 22nd day of the month, which according to the lunar Sabbath doctrine was a Sabbath. The problem with that is, when they got to their destination, they had to set up camp, which includes a lot of physical work. The whole nation was traveling together. It's a very long process to get the whole camp set up. But if it was the Sabbath day, they couldn't set up the camp because you can't do any work on the Sabbath day. So that means that the whole nation would have been in the wilderness without shelter because they could not do the physical labor it took to set up camp on the Sabbath day. Remember, what happened to the man who just went out to gather sticks on the Sabbath day? Let's read it. Numbers 15 and 32. It says, "And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness," watch this, "they found a man that gathered sticks upon the Sabbath day." Verse 33, "And they that found him gathering sticks brought him unto Moses and Aaron and unto all the congregation." Verse 34, "And they put him inward because it was not declared what should be done to him." So they found this man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day and they didn't know what to do with him. Watch this, verse 35. "And Yahweh said unto Moses, This man shall be surely put to death. all the congregation shall stone him with stones without the camp. Verse 36. And all the congregation brought him without the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died, as Yahweh commanded Moses. So this man was put to death for simply gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. But yet the Most High allowed all Israel to work and set up the whole camp on the Sabbath day? Of course not. That doesn't make any sense, because it's not the truth. We know, according to the Bible, you can't do any work on the Sabbath day. This is Exodus 31:14 again. It says, Ye shall keep the Sabbath therefore, for it is holy unto you. Everyone that defileth it shall surely be put to death. Watch this. For whosoever doeth any work therein, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. So no work is to be done on the Sabbath day. You can't have the whole nation in the wilderness setting up camp on the Sabbath day. We saw that Israel got to their destination on the 22nd day of the month. If that was the Sabbath day, they would not have been allowed to set the camp up. Now, the Most High would not put them in that situation where they had to be without shelter. So this proves that the 22nd day of that month was not the Sabbath day, which means that the lunar Sabbath doctrine is wrong. Now, let's deal with creation week. Did the moon exist during the first 3 days of creation? No. Genesis chapter 1, verses 16 and 19 tell us that the moon was made on the 4th day. Look at this diagram of creation week. The moon did not exist during the first 3 days of creation. So here's the question. Did the Most High count those 3 days as days? Yes. So that takes us back to the transitional day problem. Why do lunar Sabbath keepers say that you can't count the days when the moon is in transition, yet we see that the Most High counted 3 full days before the moon even existed? So the transitional day theory doesn't make any biblical sense. Every day is a day, whether the moon is illuminated or not. The Most High made the moon on day 4, but he waited until 3 days later on day 7 to call that day holy. He sanctified day 7, not day 4, and not day 8, day 7. Now, some people argue against this point by saying that the days of creation were not literal days of 24 hours. Therefore, we can't say that he made the moon on day 4. They believe that each day of creation was 1,000 years long based on what Peter said. However, that is not true. Let's go to 2 Peter 3:8 to get the proper understanding. It says, But beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing. Here it is. That one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So this is the verse that a lot of people use to say that the days of creation was 1,000 years long each. However, that is not what this verse is saying. Notice it says that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, not that it is 1,000 years. When Peter said this, he was quoting from the book of Psalms. Let's go to the original quote to see what this is actually talking about. This is Psalms chapter 90, verse 4. It says, For 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night. This is the verse that Peter was quoting from. Notice that it says, 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday. In other words, from the Most High's perspective, from his viewpoint, 1,000 years on earth is like one day. Why? Because the Most High is outside of our time. He sees everything all at once. So 1,000 years of our time from his perspective is as one day. not that it is one day. Let me give you an example. When we look at this diagram of creation week on the screen, we're able to see all 7 days at one time. Why? Because we're outside of the screen looking at the whole layout. Well, this is the same perspective that the Most High has when he looks at time. Why? Because he is outside of time looking at the whole layout of time. So from his perspective, 1,000 years is as one day. That's what Peter's talking about. So this verse has nothing to do with the days of creation. Those days of creation was 6 literal earthly days. And then he rested on day 7. So again, the moon was made on day 4, but the Sabbath day came 3 days later on day 7, which proves that the Sabbath day is not based on the moon. Now let's move on to another point. Remember, the Lunar Sabbath doctrine says that the new moon days are not regular days, even though we already saw that they are. However, let's look at the verses that they use to make this claim. This is Ezekiel 46:1. It says, "Thus saith the Lord God, the gate of the inner court that looketh towards the east shall be shut the 6 working days. But on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened." So they say that 3 different types of days are mentioned in this verse: work days, Sabbath days, and new moon days. Since new moon day is listed separately from the work days and the Sabbath days, they say it has to be its own kind of day. The problem with that is there is no verse in the Bible that says that new moon day is counted separately from the rest of the week. People make that claim, but the Bible doesn't. All days fall on either one of the 6 working days or on the weekly Sabbath day. Now, if a feast day falls on a normal work day, the rules attached to that feast day override the rules of that work day because it's a special occasion. That's why the Most High tells us on specific feast days not to do any work. Why does he have to say that? Because those days are normally work days. But feast days are special to the Most High, so they override the rules of a normal work day. Now, let's read this verse again because there's another question that has to be addressed. It says, "Thus saith the Lord God," watch this, "the gate of the inner court that looketh towards the east shall be shut the 6 working days. But on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened." So a lot of brothers say this is impossible on a normal calendar, because if the new moon falls on a work day, how can you open the gate when it's supposed to be shut on working days? But again, this is easily explained. It's the same situation as the feast days. Let's look at a normal 7-day week. Now, the new moon is a special occasion that only happens once in a biblical month. So if the new moon happens to come in on one of the normal work days, because it's a special occasion, you can open the gate, even though it's a normal work day. New moon day overrides the rules for a normal work day, just like the feast days do. Watch this. This is Leviticus 23:27. It says, "Also on the 10th day of this 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. And it shall be an holy convocation unto you. And ye shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh." Verse 28. "And ye shall do no work in that same day." Why? It says, "For it is a day of atonement, to make an atonement for you before Yahweh your God." Now, why did the Most High have to tell us not to work on this day? Because it's a normal work day. But because he gave us the Day of Atonement to keep, the rules for a normal work day no longer apply. This is the same thing that's happening with the new moon day in Ezekiel 46:1. New moon day is not a special category day. It's listed separately because new moon day is an exception to the rule of the gate being closed. Just like the Day of Atonement or any other feast day overrides the rules for a normal work day. Now, before I continue, there's something that has to be explained. Many people don't realize that there are two different types of days translated as Sabbath in the Bible. When you deal with the weekly Sabbath, the Hebrew word is Shabbath. When you deal with the yearly Sabbaths, like the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of Tabernacles, for example, the Hebrew word for those Sabbaths is Shabbathwan. Now, in both cases, the word is translated into English as Sabbath. But there is a difference between a Shabbath and a Shabbathwan. For example, on a Shabbath day, like the weekly Sabbath, you can't cook, you can't kindle any fire at all, you can't gather sticks, you can't carry burdens out of your house, you can't do any manner of work at all. However, on a Shabbathwan day, you can cook, you can kindle fire, you can gather sticks, and you can carry burdens. But again, there's no distinction of these types of days in the English. It just says Sabbath for all of them. But in the Hebrew, one says Shabbath and the other says Shabbathwan. Let me give you an example. This is Exodus 35:3. It says, "Ye shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day." So this is the weekly Sabbath. Now, if you can't kindle fire, obviously that means you can't cook either. Let's look at the word Sabbath in this verse. Notice it's the Hebrew word Shabbath. So we see that you are not allowed to cook or kindle any fire on a Shabbath day. Now, let's go to Exodus 12:3. This is in reference to the Passover and unleavened bread. It says, "Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house." So we had to choose a lamb for the Passover. Let's jump down to verse 6. It says, "And ye shall keep it up until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening." So we kept the lamb until the 14th day of the month at evening, which is the Passover. When the evening came, which starts the 15th day, we killed the lamb. So obviously, after we killed it in the evening, we had to cook it. Watch this. Let's go down to verse 8. It says, "And they shall eat the flesh in that night." Here it is. "Roast with fire and unleavened bread, and with bitter herbs they shall eat it." So we were allowed to cook and kindle fire on this day. Let's go down to verse 10. It says, "And ye shall let nothing of it remain until the morning." We had to eat all the lamb that night. But if we didn't eat it all, it says, "And that which remaineth of it until the morning," here it is, "ye shall burn with fire." So again, we were allowed to cook and kindle fire on this day because it's not a Shabbath day, it's a Shabbathwan day. Even though the English only says Sabbath, there is a difference. Now remember, on the weekly Sabbath or the Shabbath, when they found a man gathering sticks, they stoned that man to death because you can't gather sticks on the Shabbath day. But let's look at the Feast of Tabernacles. This is Leviticus 23:39. It says, "Also in the 15th day of the 7th month, when ye have gathered in the fruit of the land, ye shall keep a feast unto Yahweh 7 days." So this is a yearly feast. It says, "On the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath." So we see that the first day and the 8th day of this feast is a Sabbath. Watch this. Verse 40. And ye shall take you on the first day, which is a Sabbath, it says, the boughs of goodly trees, watch this, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook, and ye shall rejoice before Yahweh your God 7 days. So, not only did we gather sticks on this Sabbath, we gathered whole branches to build shelters to dwell in. Now, why were we able to do this? Let's look at the word Sabbath in verse 39. Here's the verse with the Hebrew showing. Notice that the word for Sabbath in both places is Shabbathwan. See that? On a Shabbath day, you can't gather sticks or do any work. But on a Shabbathwan day, you can do work as long as it's not servile work. Watch this. This is Leviticus 23 and 34. It says, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, The 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days unto Yahweh. So again, this is the same Feast of Tabernacles when we were allowed to gather branches to make shelters to dwell in. Watch this. Verse 35, it says, On the first day shall be an holy convocation. Here it is. Ye shall do no servile work therein. See that? This is a Shabbathwan day. We can't do any servile work on these days, meaning service work or working for money, but we can do work in connection with the celebration of the day. See, it's important that we understand the difference between a Shabbat day and a Shabbathwan day. No work at all can be done on a Shabbat day, but work can be done on a Shabbathwan day as long as it's not servile work and it's in connection with that particular holy day. So now that we understand that, let's go to Amos chapter 8 and verse 5, because lunar Sabbath keepers often quote this verse, but they miss a very crucial point. It says, saying, When will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit? So they say that this verse proves the lunar Sabbath doctrine because the new moon and the Sabbath are mentioned together. In other words, the people wanted the new moon to be gone because that was the Sabbath day. However, when you carefully research this verse, you find out that the new moon in this verse is a specific new moon. See, the problem is new moon days are not Shabbat days. New moon days are Shabbathwan days. And there's only one new moon day in the year that servile work is not allowed on. Watch this. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 24. It says, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, watch this, In the 7th month, in the first day of the month, shall ye have a Sabbath, a memorial of blowing of trumpets and holy convocation. So here we have specific instructions for the memorial of blowing of trumpets. This takes place in the 7th month on the first day of the month. So we know that this is a new moon day. Watch this, verse 25. Ye shall do no servile work therein. Again, servile work means you can't work for money. It says, But ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So the Most High explicitly told us that we can't work for money on this new moon day. However, this is the only new moon day in the Bible that the Most High told us not to do servile work. There is no other new moon day in the year mentioned with any work restrictions. Now, if every new moon has the same work restrictions, Why did the Most High single out this particular new moon to tell us not to do any servile work? Shouldn't we already know that, if this rule applies to every new moon? Yet, he only gives us work restrictions on the memorial of blowing of trumpets new moon day. Watch. Let's go to Numbers 10 and 10. It says, also in the day of your gladness, and in your solemn days, watch this, and in the beginnings of your months. So this is on new moon days. It says, ye shall blow with trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may be to you for a memorial before your God. I am Yahweh, your God. So the Most High told us to blow trumpets every month on new moon day. But notice, he didn't give us any work restrictions, except for in the 7th month, which is the memorial of blowing of trumpets. See, the memorial of blowing of trumpets is the new moon that Israel is complaining about in Amos chapter 8 and verse 5. That's not talking about every new moon, because work restrictions was not given to us on every new moon. Watch this. Let's go to Numbers 28 and 11. It says, and in the beginnings of your months. So again, we know that this is new moon day. It says, ye shall offer a burnt offering unto Yahweh, 2 young bullocks and 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without spot. Again, the Most High gives us precise instructions on how to do the offerings on these new moon days, but he doesn't say anything at all about not working. But watch this. Let's go down to verse 17. It says, and in the 15th day of this month is the feast. 7 days shall unleavened bread be eaten. So this is the feast of unleavened bread, which we know is a Shabbathwan day. Verse 18, and the first day shall be an holy convocation. Watch this. Ye shall do no manner of servile work therein. See that? When the Most High doesn't want service work to be done on a specific day, he tells us. But he didn't do that with every new moon, because every new moon doesn't have a servile work restriction on it. However, the memorial of blowing of trumpets does. Watch this. This is Numbers 29 and 1. It says, and in the 7th month, on the first day of the month, ye shall have an holy convocation. Watch this. Ye shall do no servile work. Why? It says, it is a day of blowing the trumpets unto you. See that? Whenever we read about this specific new moon day, the memorial of blowing of trumpets, in the 7th month on the first day, we see a servile work restriction attached to it. But at the start of all the other months on new moon day, the Most High doesn't give us a servile work restriction. Why? Because again, the memorial of blowing of trumpets is the only new moon day that servile work is not allowed. So precept upon precept, this is the new moon that Israel is complaining about in Amos chapter 8 and verse 5. So, as we have seen, the lunar Sabbath doctrine is flawed on many levels. I showed you in the beginning that the weekly Sabbath fell on the 3rd day of the month when David went to the priest and ate the showbread, and that debunks the whole theory that the Sabbath day has to fall on the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. We then saw that on the 22nd day of the month, Israel got to their destination and had to set up camp, which would have violated the laws of the weekly Sabbath. Remember, you can't build on the weekly Sabbath. You can't gather sticks. You can't do any servile work or any work on that day. So the 22nd of that month was not a Sabbath. Also, the lunar Sabbath doctrine doesn't count transitional days as real days. And there is no scripture in the Bible to support that, not one. There are multiple problems with the lunar Sabbath doctrine. That's just a few. So with that being the case, what day is the weekly Sabbath? It's no big surprise. is Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. Now, I already know what a lot of people are saying. They're saying, show me the words Friday and Saturday in the Bible. You're not going to find the words Friday and Saturday in the Bible. That's true. And I'm going to address that argument more specifically later on, because it's really not as strong of an argument as people think it is. But again, we don't find the words Friday or Saturday in the Bible, but that doesn't mean that it can't be proven. Because what we can do is link the Bible and history together to prove that the weekly Sabbath is Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. You see, in the very beginning, the Most High created a 7-day cycle, and that 7-day cycle has never been broken, contrary to what people might say. Now, let's deal with some history concerning the Sabbath day. Now, a lot of lunar Sabbath keepers say that Israelites learned the Friday sundown to Saturday sundown Sabbath while we were in the Babylonian captivity. And they say that we're still doing it that way because of that captivity. Now, that's a historical claim. So the first thing that we have to do is prove that that is not true. Let's go to the New Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia of Religious Knowledge. This is volume 10, page 135, in regards to the Sabbath day. It says, "It is now held by many that the Sabbath is Babylonian in origin." So that's the claim people are making. Watch this. It says, "Consequently, the Babylonian Sabbath was a day of penance and the middle of the Babylonian month. So the Babylonians kept their Sabbath day once in the middle of the month." That doesn't sound like Friday sundown to Saturday sundown to me. Let's keep going. It says, "It has also been held that the 7th, 14th, 21st, and 28th days of the month, designated as ill-omened, were the Babylonian Sabbaths. But for this argument, there is no evidence. In other words, there's no historical proof that the Babylonians kept their Sabbaths on those particular days." It says, "And it must accordingly be assumed that the 15th day of each month was the Sabbath of the Babylonians." This is important because a lot of people are reading random websites about the Babylonian Sabbath and they're getting the wrong information. We see here that the Babylonians actually kept the Sabbath in the middle of the month on the 15th. It says, "This day was reckoned that of the full moon." So their Sabbath day was based on the full moon. Now watch this. It says, "But since the Hebrew Sabbath was not connected with the full moon and was a day of gladness, not of penance," watch this, "and since the Babylonians had no week of 7 days," here it is, "the assumption that the Hebrews borrowed the Sabbath from the Babylonians lacks all foundation." In other words, it's completely false to say that the Israelites changed the Sabbath day to Friday sundown to Saturday sundown as a result of the Babylonian captivity. That is false. That is a lie, because the Babylonian Sabbath was only once a month on the 15th. So the Babylonian Israelite Friday sundown, Saturday sundown connection is a lie. As we read, that argument lacks all foundation. Now, I'm not promoting this whole encyclopedia. There are some things in this book that are clearly wrong. But the point is, Israelites did not learn the Friday sundown to Saturday sundown Sabbath from the Babylonians. Now, I'm going to take it one step further in case somebody is still unsure about that point. Let's deal with simple logic. If the Sabbath day was changed after the Babylonian captivity, that would mean that the Jews who went back into the land after the Babylonian captivity was keeping the Sabbath day the wrong way. Now, if that's the case, why did Yahushua keep it on the same day and same time as the other Jews when he came on the scene? We know that the Sabbath day is part of the law and that Yahushua was sinless. So if the Jews was keeping it the wrong way, he would have corrected them. However, we see him keeping it right along with them at the same time. This is Luke chapter 4 and verse 16. It says, "And he, Yahushua, came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was," watch this, "he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read." Now, when he went in that synagogue, he wasn't in there by himself. The other Jews was there with him. This verse proves that the Jews in the land were keeping it the right way. Because if they wasn't, Yahushua would not have kept it with them. Now, this is beautiful because we have historical records from the first century that show us that Yahushua and the other Jews kept it from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. But before I go there, I'm clearing all the objections out of the way. Now, a lot of people talk about the Romans and the 8-day week calendar that they used. So they say the Israelites could not have kept the seventh-day Sabbath based on a calendar because the Romans had an 8-day week calendar. But what they don't know is that the Romans also had a 7-day planetary week calendar at the same time. Look at this. This is a book called Sunday in Roman Paganism by Robert Leo Odom. This is page 77. At the top, you see it says, planetary week in the 1st century BC. So this calendar goes back to the 1st century. Down here it says, the Sabine calendar. It says, in 1795 were found the marble fragments of what is known as the Sabine calendar, Fasti Sabini, in a place in central Italy. So these are fragments of an old Roman calendar. It says, these portions represent the months of September and October in the Julian calendar. The experts in this type of archaeological finds have declared them to belong to the reign of Augustus Caesar. Now, the Julian calendar was established in 46 BC, but this calendar was established under the reign of Augustus Caesar. When? It says, and that they were in use between 19 BC and 4 AD. 19 BC is after 46 BC. And more importantly, 19 BC is before the birth of Yahushua, which means that when he came on the scene in the 1st century, this calendar was in use. Now, what's so special about this calendar? Let's go to another book called Famous First in the Ancient and Greek World. This is page 116. The heading says, the first reference to a 7-day week. So we're about to read about an historical reference to a 7-day week calendar used in Rome. It says, an inscription, CIL 1.220, watch this, dated between 19 BC and AD 14, preserving the remains of a Sabine calendar. So this is the same calendar. Watch this. It says, is the earliest known public record of a 7-day week. So this calendar was a 7-day week calendar. And again, the starting point for this calendar is 19 BC. That is before the birth of Yahushua, which means that when he came on the scene, there was a 7-day week calendar in use. So yes, there was an 8-day week calendar, but there was also a 7-day week calendar being used at the same time. Now in this book, they show how the two calendars were used together. It says, the calendar as reproduced by Balsdon 62. Now, let's read the paragraph. It says, where the first column represents the 7 days, so that's the 7-day week, it says, the second column, the nundinum, 8-day cycle in which the 8th day was a market day, it says, the third column represents days on which business could or could not be transacted. Now, let's look at the first column, which is a 7-day week. Notice that you have 7 letters that each represent a day of the week. E, F, G, A, B, C, D. That's 7 days. And then the cycle starts over again back at E. E, F, so forth and so on. That was the 7-day week in Rome. Now, let's look at the middle column, which is an 8-day week. Notice that you have 8 letters that each represent a day of the week. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. That's 8 days. And then the cycle starts over again back at A. So we clearly see that there was 2 calendars being used in Rome during the 1st century, way before the time of Constantine in 321 AD. Now, when you look at these 2 calendars, notice that they don't line up the same. The 7-day week calendar is on a totally different cycle. See, the Israelites in Rome didn't use the 8-day week calendar. We used the 7-day week calendar because the Most High gave us a 7-day week cycle in the very beginning. Now, here's the thing about it. When you do the research, you find out that it was because of Israelite influence that the Romans switched over to our 7-day weekly cycle. They didn't influence us, we influenced them. Josephus spoke about this in his book, and he lived in the 1st century also. This is from the works of Josephus, Against Apion, Book 2, page 811, section 40, subsection 282. It says, Nay, further, the multitude of mankind itself have had a great inclination of a long time to follow our religious observances. Watch this. For there is not any city of the Grecians, nor any of the barbarians, nor any nation whatsoever, whither our custom of resting on the 7th day have not come. So here we see Josephus testifying to the fact that the 7th day Sabbath influenced all the nations we came in contact with, and even the whole world for that matter. So no, we did not follow the Romans. They actually followed us. So now that we know there was a 7-day week calendar in use in Rome during the 1st century, let's prove that Saturday is in fact the Sabbath day. That's Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, because biblical days start in the evening. Friday sundown is the start of Saturday. Now, historically, we know that the Roman day of Saturn is the same thing as modern day Saturday. That's where the name comes from. We already proved that Yahushua kept the Sabbath day on the same day as the other Jews in the 1st century. So if we can show that the Roman day of Saturn is the same day as the Jews' weekly Sabbath, that proves that Saturday is in fact the Sabbath day. Why? Because Yahushua verified that the Jews was keeping the Sabbath on the right day. So watch this. Now we know historically that the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. 14 years later in 84 AD, a Roman soldier named Julius Frontinus wrote a book called Stratagemmaticon. This book is about using military strategies to defeat your enemy. This is page 98. Let's see what military strategy was used to defeat the Jews. It says, the deified Vespasian attacked the Jews on the day of Saturn. Watch this. A day on which it is sinful for them to do any business, and so defeated them. See that? What day is it sinful for Israelites to do business on? The Sabbath day. So the military strategy that Vespasian used was to attack the Jews on the Sabbath day, which the Romans called Saturn Day. This proves that Saturday is the Sabbath day. Here's another testimonial from a Roman historian named Dio Cassius. This is from his book entitled Roman History. This is volume 8, page 271. It says, "Thus was Jerusalem destroyed on the very day of Saturn." Watch this. "The day which even now the Jews reverence most." Again, we know that the Roman day of Saturn is our modern Saturday. So we see historically what day our foreparents kept the Sabbath on. Let's go to page 125 and 127 in this same book. Now this is talking about General Pompei and how he overtook the temple in 65 BC. It says, "But the temple itself, which the other party had occupied, he captured only with difficulty, for it was on high ground and was fortified by a wall of its own." So Pompei had a hard time capturing the temple because it was fortified, and we protected it with soldiers. Watch this. It says, "And if they had continued defending it all days alike, he could not have got possession of it." In other words, there were some days that we didn't fight on. Why? It says, "As it was, they made an exception of what are called the days of Saturn." See that? On the days of Saturn, we didn't fight because fighting is a physical activity. It says, "And by doing no work at all on those days, afforded the Romans an opportunity in this interval to batter down the wall." Again, we didn't fight on the Sabbath day, so that left us defenseless. It says, "Thus the defenders, Israelites, were captured on the day of Saturn without making any defense." Now we can clearly see that the Roman day of Saturn, which is modern day Saturday, is in fact the Sabbath day. Josephus recorded this same history in his book. Watch how he tells it. This is War of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 7, Section 3, subsection 146. It says, "Nor had the Romans succeeded in their endeavors had not Pompei taken notice of the 7th days." See that? Notice that Dio Cassius, being a Roman, called it the days of Saturn, but Josephus, being a Jew, called it the 7th days. It says, "On which the Jews abstained from all sorts of work on a religious account, and raised his bank, but restrained his soldiers from fighting on those days." Again, Pompei wouldn't attack us on normal work days because we would fight back. It says, "For the Jews only acted defensively on Sabbath days." You see? So again, we see Josephus, a Jew who lived during the time of Yahushua, connecting the Israelite Sabbath day with the Roman day of Saturn. It's the same day historically. We didn't fight on the Sabbath days because fighting is a physical activity. The Romans knew that, so they attacked us on our Sabbath day, which they called the day of Saturn. It's the same day. Again, if we were keeping the wrong day, Yahushua would have corrected us, but he didn't. He kept the same day that those Jews kept during that time. Now, the Romans knew that we wouldn't fight back on the Sabbath because other people used that same strategy on us hundreds of years before they did. That history is in the Apocrypha. This is 1 Maccabees chapter 2 and verse 31. It says, "Now when it was told the king's servants and the host that was at Jerusalem in the city of David that certain men who had broken the king's commandment were gone down into the secret places in the wilderness," verse 32, "they pursued after them with a great number, and having overtaken them, they camped against them." Watch this. "And made war against them on the Sabbath day." So here we see that the officers of Antiochus made war against Israelites on the Sabbath day. Now let's jump down to verse 36. It says, "Howbeit they answered them not." See, Israel didn't respond to the threats. It says, "Neither cast they a stone at them, nor stopped the places where they lay hid." Verse 37, "But said, Let us die all in our innocency. Heaven and earth will testify for us that ye put us to death wrongfully." So we see that Israel refused to fight on the Sabbath day. They said, we'll just die before we violate the Sabbath day. Now let's see what happened. Verse 38. "So they rose up against them in battle on the Sabbath, and they slew them, with their wives and children and their cattle, to the number of 1,000 people." So Israel was slaughtered because they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath day. And that's the same military strategy that the Romans used against us to destroy the temple. They attacked us on the Roman Saturn day, which is modern day Saturday. That's clear. Now, just in case somebody tries to say that the Jews were keeping Saturn day because they were worshiping the pagan god Saturn, let's go back to the book called Roman History by Dio Cassius. This is the bottom of page 127, and it's talking about the Jews. It says, "They are distinguished from the rest of mankind in practically every detail of life, and especially by the fact that," watch this, "they do not honor any of the usual gods." So here you have a Roman who lived during this time telling us that the Jews did not worship the pagan god Saturn. It says, "But show extreme reverence for one particular divinity." Now, who is that divinity? It's the Most High Yahweh. So that argument is false. So brothers that are sincere have to stop using that argument because it's false. Again, Yahweh was keeping the same Sabbath day as the rest of Israel. And if they were keeping it wrong, he would not have kept it with them. I have to keep driving that point home because that point shuts down the whole argument. See again, the Most High established a continual 7-day weekly cycle that has never changed since the beginning of time. People act like that's so hard to believe. Yet they believe that he made the sun, they believe he made the moon and the stars, they believe he made people, but somehow he can't keep a 7-day cycle going. Of course he can. The weekly cycle has never changed. Let's go to Mark 2:27. I went over this in a different video, but I'm going to do it again. This is Mark 2:27. It says, "And he said unto them, The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." What does this verse actually mean? Let's look at it in the Greek, because the Greek is clearer. Mark 2:27, in the Greek, it says, "Kai elegant atois, ta Sabbathon diaton anthropon egeneto, ka uk ha anthropos diata Sabbathon." Now let's focus on the middle section. It says, "Ta Sabbathon diaton anthropon egeneto." The Sabbath was made for the man. Tan anthropon, the man. The Greek says the Sabbath was made for the man. This word anthropon means man, but this word tan right before it is the word the. Why is that important? Because when you place the definite article the before the word man, that implies a specific man. So who was the man that the Sabbath was made for? It was made for the man Adam to have a day of rest. Now, if the Sabbath was made for the man Adam, obviously he kept it on the 7th day when the Most High sanctified it and made it holy. So how did the Sabbath jump from the 7th day when Adam kept it to now being kept based on the new moon? That doesn't make sense. Remember, the Sabbath day was established 3 days after the moon was created. So it doesn't make any sense that it would have changed to a different day later on. Why? because the 7-day cycle was ordained to be observed throughout all our generations. So that means that the Sabbath day that Yahushua kept is the same Sabbath day that Adam kept. Therefore, it has never changed since the beginning of time. Now, even after all this information, some people will still say time has been lost and we don't know what day it is now because the calendar was changed a bunch of times. So let's deal with the calendar change argument. One of the verses that lunar Sabbath keepers use is Daniel 7:25. Let's read it. It says, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High." Here it is. "And think to change times and laws." Now, I agree with this verse. Time has been changed, but the changes in time have not affected the Sabbath day. Watch this. Let's go into some history pertaining to this topic, because people always talk about the changeover from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, but they don't bring out the actual history of how the Gregorian calendar was established. All you hear is, you're going by the Gregorian calendar. Listen, it's true that the Gregorian calendar is a new calendar, but the adoption of it did not affect the weekly cycle at all. That is what actually matters. Not who made it or how new it is. The question is, did the 7-day weekly cycle change? That is the question. And the answer is no, it did not. So what actually happened? This is what happened. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII instituted his calendar by jumping ahead 11 days numerically. The 7-day weekly cycle was not affected. The order of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday was not affected. He only changed the numbers of the days. It was Thursday, October the 4th, and the next day would have been Friday, October the 5th. But instead, it became Friday, October the 15th. So 11 numerical days were added, but the order of the days of the week did not change at all. The weekly cycle stayed exactly the same. Look at this calendar. This is a picture from when the calendar change was made in October in the year of 1582. Notice, it was Thursday, the 4th under the Julian calendar, and the next day it was Friday, the 15th under the Gregorian calendar. 11 numerical days were added, but the weekly cycle did not change. It still went from Thursday to Friday. Now, England waited until 1752 to change over to the Gregorian calendar, and they made the same adjustments by jumping the days ahead numerically. But again, the weekly cycle did not change at all. That is the history of what happened. So, the cycle of days that we are on now is the exact same cycle of days that Yahushua was on under the Julian calendar. So we do know what day it is because we have the historical records. Now, who was the man that actually put the Gregorian calendar together? His name was Aloysius Lilius. When the Catholic Church brought him in to come up with the new calendar, there was various ideals tossed around about how it should be done. But there was one ideal that never came up. Look at this. This is the Catholic Encyclopedia, Volume 9, page 251, under the heading Lilius. Now, this is in reference to the changeover to the Gregorian calendar. It says, "Thus, every imaginable proposition was made." Watch this. Only one ideal was never mentioned. It says, "The abandonment of the 7-day week." You see? So it was never even an option to change the weekly cycle when they switched to the Gregorian calendar. They never even considered it. Now, this is what the people said who actually did it. This is not just somebody repeating something that they heard. This is the history right here. They kept the same weekly cycle. Now, earlier, I said I was going to address the argument when Lunar Sabbath keepers say, show me the words Friday and Saturday in the Bible. To be honest, that's a silly argument because there are many modern words that we don't find in the Bible, yet we clearly know what the Bible is saying, even though those words are not there. So that argument really has no weight. See, it's true that the pagan names that are given to the days of the week are not in the Bible. However, those names are just placed on top of the corresponding numbers. For example, they took day 1 and put the name Sunday on it. That doesn't mean it's not day 1. People call it Sunday, but it's still day 1. People call it Thursday, but it's still day 5. People call it Saturday, but it's still day 7. So you don't have to literally see the words Friday and Saturday in the Bible. That's a weak argument, especially when you know the history. Let's go to the Catholic Encyclopedia. This is volume 3, page 740, under the heading Chronology. It says, the days of the week are numbered according to their natural order. Sunday equals 1, Monday equals 2, Tuesday equals 3, Wednesday equals 4, Thursday equals 5, Friday equals 6, Saturday equals 7. That is not hard to understand. It goes on to say, it is to be noted that in the Christian period, meaning since the time of Yahushua, watch this, the order in the days in the week has never been interrupted. So the same day that we call Saturday now is the same day that was Saturday back then. But the Romans called it Saturn Day. The changes to the calendar did not affect the order of the days of the week. It says, thus, when Gregory the 13th reformed the calendar in 1582, Thursday, the 4th of October, was followed by Friday, the 15th of October. So we see the same consistent history being taught. So again, we do know what day it is because we have the historical records to prove it. Now, here's the thing. I don't care about the Gregorian calendar, but that's not the point. The point is trying to calculate the weekly Sabbath based on the new moon will never work because the Sabbath comes around consistently every 7 days. But the new moon doesn't operate on a perfect 7-day cycle. You will never get a continuous 6-day work, 1-day rest cycle using the new moon. You will always need to add 1 or 2 extra days at the end of every month to make it work. So again, the whole, you're using the Gregorian calendar. That argument doesn't actually mean anything when you understand and know the history. Now, let me explain something that needs to be understood. The days of the week do not run parallel with the days of the month. For example, the first day of the month is based on the new moon. That is correct, because the new moon determines a new biblical month. So we need to know when the new moon is because the yearly feast days are linked to the moon. Watch. This is Ecclesiasticus 43 and verse 7. It says, from the moon is the sign of feast. You see? So all the feast days are linked to the moon. However, the weekly Sabbath is not linked to the moon. See, the weekly cycle and the monthly cycle are 2 different cycles. Even though New Moon Day is the first day of a biblical month, the new moon can come in on any day of the week. Because the weekly cycle is a continuous 7-day cycle that is not affected by the moon or anything else. The Most High established that in the very beginning. That's why 3 days had already passed before the moon was even made. So the days of the week are separate from the days of a biblical month. Here's an example. If the new moon comes in on the 3rd day of the week, the next day is not the 2nd day of the week, it's the 4th day of the week. Why? Because the 7-day cycle has to complete itself. There is always 7 days in a week. In fact, the word week means 7. So there must be a completion of 7 days, over and over and over again. The moon does not change that pattern. There is no scripture in the whole Bible that justifies a full 7-day week not being completed. So the new moon does not cut short 1 week and start a brand new week over, because there must be a completion of the full 7-day week cycle. Now, let's go into this book called The Works of Philo. Who was Philo? Philo of Alexandria, also called Philo Judaeus, was a Hellenistic Jew who lived in Alexandria, in the Roman province of Egypt. He was born in 25 BC and he died in 50 AD. Philo was a Jew who lived in the 1st century during the time of Yahushua. He is a credible witness as to when and how the Sabbath was kept. Why? Because he was there and he wrote about it. Now let's go to the section of this book called On the Creation. This is page 18, section 128, and it's talking about the number 7 and the Sabbath day. It says, "These things and more are said in a philosophical spirit about the number 7, on account of which it has received the highest honors in the highest nature. And it is honored by those of the highest reputation among both Greeks and barbarians, who devote themselves to mathematical sciences." Watch this. It says, "It was also greatly honored by Moses, a man much attached to excellence of all sorts, who described its beauty on the most holy pillars of the law, and wrote it in the hearts of all those who were subject to him." Watch this. "Commanding them at the end of each period of 6 days to keep the 7th holy." Notice it says at the end of each period of 6 days, meaning there always has to be a consecutive period of 6 days in between each Sabbath day. The 7-day cycle cannot be broken because the Most High established that in the beginning. You can't throw a transitional day in the mix because that changes the whole cycle. As we saw earlier, if you follow the Lunar Sabbath, the holy 7-day cycle is broken at the end of every month. If you count the 2 transitional days as work days, that would give you a 2-day work week. And that's just ridiculous. You must have 6 days between each Sabbath day. Thus saith the Most High Yahweh. And if anybody says anything different, then you're going directly against the Most High himself. This is Leviticus 23, verse 3. It says, "6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest." That's plain. There must be 6 days between each Sabbath day. Not 1 day, not 2 days, not 4 days, 5 days. There must be 6 days between each Sabbath day. Now, if you say something different, you're going against the Most High's word. It's really that simple. Now, let's get one more passage from this book. This section is called The Second Festival. This is page 575, section 65. It says, "It is forbidden also on this day to kindle a fire, as being the beginning and seed of all the business of life." So we know this is talking about the Sabbath day. Now let's jump down to this section. It says, "Not only that those who were free should abstain from all works on the 7th day, but also that their servants and handmaids should have a respite from their task." Watch this. "Proclaiming a day of freedom to them also," here it is, "after every space of 6 days. Again, notice the emphasis is after every space of 6 days. So there cannot be any transitional days that don't count as days. The holy 7-day cycle cannot be broken. The Most High established it in the very beginning, and it has never changed. So we see that to be true according to the Bible and historically. Now, let's look at a series of quotes from people who are actually qualified to speak on this subject based on their expertise. This first quote goes back to March 12, 1932. This is a quote from Dr. James Robertson, who was the director of the U.S. Naval Observatory Department in Washington, D.C. He was asked about the possible changes that occurred to the weekly cycle due to all the calendar changes. This is what he said. As to question 1, I can only state that in connection with the proposed simplification of the calendar, we have had occasion to investigate the results of the works of specialists in chronology. Watch this. And we have never found one of them that has ever had the slightest doubt the continuity of the weekly cycle since long before the Christian era. As to question 2, there has been no change in our calendar in past centuries that has affected in any way the cycle of the week. So here we have the director of the U.S. Naval Observatory Department attesting to the fact that no calendar changes have ever affected the 7-day weekly cycle. Here's another quote by Dr. Charles Totten, who was the professor of astronomy at Yale University. He wrote a book called Joshua's Long Day and the Tao of Ahaz. This is page 78. It says, in spite of all our dickerings with the calendar, it is patent that the human race never lost the septenary, that means 7-day, sequence of weekdays, and that the Sabbath of these latter times comes down to us from Adam through the ages without a single lapse. Let's get one more. Here's a quote by Professor Demetrios Egenides, who was the director of the Observatory of Athens. It says, the continuity of the week has crossed the centuries and all known calendars still intact. You see? The reason the weekly cycle was never broken is because the Most High didn't allow it to be broken. Why? So that we can properly keep the Sabbath day the right way. Now, with everything we looked at, it should be clear that the Sabbath day is Saturday, which is Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, because again, a biblical day starts in the evening when the sun goes down. Let me show you that. This is Leviticus 23 and 27. It says, also on the 10th day of the 7th month, there shall be a day of atonement. It shall be an holy convocation unto you, and ye shall afflict your souls and offer an offering made by fire unto Yahweh. So notice it says that the Day of Atonement starts on the 10th day. Now let's go down to verse 32. This is still talking about the Day of Atonement, which is on the 10th day. It says, it shall be unto you a Sabbath of rest, and ye shall afflict your souls. Watch this. In the 9th day of the month at even, from even unto even shall ye celebrate your Sabbath. Now, why does this verse say that the Day of Atonement starts on the 9th day at even, but verse 27 says it starts on the 10th day? Because the 9th day at evening is the start of the 10th day. Biblical days start at evening time, not at nighttime and not in the morning. Biblical days start at evening time when the sun goes down. Watch. This is Deuteronomy 16 and 6. It says, but at the place which Yahweh thy God shall choose to place his name in, there thou shalt sacrifice the Passover at even. So we see that the Passover is sacrificed at evening time. When is evening time? It says, at the going down of the sun, at the season that thou camest forth out of Egypt. So evening time is when the sun goes down, which is a brand new day. Watch. Let's go to Luke chapter 13 and verse 10. It says, and he, Yahushua, was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. Verse 11. And behold, there was a woman which had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bowed together, and could in no wise lift up herself. So Yahushua was out teaching on the Sabbath day, and he saw this woman that was sick. Now let's go down to verse 13. It says, and he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and glorified the Most High. Now watch this, verse 14. And the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation. Watch this. Because that Yahushua had healed on the Sabbath day. So the rulers had a problem with Yahushua healing people on the Sabbath day. What else did the ruler say? It says, and said unto the people, there are 6 days in which men ought to work. In them, therefore, come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. So we see that the rulers in Israel were teaching the people not to come to be healed on the Sabbath day. Remember that point. Now let's go to Luke 4 and 16. It says, and he, Yahushua, came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, watch this, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. So here we see Yahushua again in the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Let's jump down to verse 38. It says, and he arose out of the synagogue. So Yahushua left the synagogue. Again, this was the Sabbath day. It says, and enter into Simon's house. And Simon's wife's mother was taken with a great fever, and they besought him for her. So this is Simon Peter, and his wife's mother was sick on the Sabbath day. Now let's pick this story up at the same place in Matthew chapter 8 and verse 14. It says, and when Yahushua was come into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of a fever. Verse 15. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered unto him. So Yahushua healed her on the Sabbath day. But watch this. Verse 16. When the even was come, when evening time came, it says, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils, and he cast out the spirits with his word, and healed all that were sick. Now, why did the people wait until the evening time to come to Yahushua to get healed? Because the Pharisees was teaching the people not to go get healed on the Sabbath day, like we read in Luke chapter 13. So, if the people waited until the evening time to come to Yahushua for healing, what does that show us? It shows us that a new day starts at evening time. The people waited until the evening time because the Sabbath day was over at that point and a new day had started. See, when the sun goes down at evening, that starts a new day. Now let's read this same verse in Mark. Watch this. This is Mark 1 and 32. It says, and at even, watch this, when the sun did set, or when the sun went down, it says, they brought unto him all that were diseased and them that were possessed with devils. See that? When the sun sets, or when the sun goes down, that is a new day. So on Friday evening, when the sun goes down, that is the start of Saturday. That's why we keep the Sabbath from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, because that is the weekly 7th day Sabbath. Let me make one more important point. When the Most High was teaching Israel how to keep the weekly Sabbath in the wilderness, he didn't use the moon. He used manna to teach them a 7-day cycle. He gave them manna each day for the first 5 days and a double portion of manna on the 6th day. Then they knew that the next day was the Sabbath day. He did that cycle over and over again so that they understood the 7-day cycle. Not one time did he tell them to look at the moon and use the moon as a guide for the 7th day. You won't find that in the Bible. He taught them the weekly Sabbath using manna, not the moon. Now, there's so much more I could go into, both biblically and historically. But at this point, if somebody still disagrees, they're going to disagree no matter what I say. Now, this is a long video with a lot of information in it. And I expect a lot of my brothers who are lunar Sabbath keepers to have problems with what I'm saying. But here's the thing. If you don't come with no scriptures and you just come with slander, I'm going to ignore you and erase your comment. I'm telling you straight up, because I know how Israel is. I'm not here for the name calling and all the scare tactics. Deal with the scriptures, deal with credible history, and let's establish the truth. But if you come with your name calling and your threats, I'm going to erase your comments and block you. Plain and simple. I have no problem blocking people, because this is about the truth and being men, not being emotional because you don't have no scriptures to support your doctrine. Again, I'm cool with a lot of brothers who follow the lunar Sabbath, but the truth is the truth, and we should be able to discuss these things as men in the scriptures and dealing with history on this particular subject without the name calling and the childish behavior. I'm sick of us talking about we the greatest people on the face of the earth, and we can't even conduct ourselves in a mature manner when it comes to a disagreement. Overly emotional and acting like children. We got to do better than that. So I hope somebody got some understanding from this video. And with that, I say, Shalom.